Meanwhile, in her room in the castle, the Queen looked into a mirror and asked, what did she ask, Em? Magic mirror on the wall, who is now the fairest one of all? The mirror replied, over the 7 jewelled hills beyond the 7th fall, in the cottage of the 7 dwarfs dwells Snow White, the fairest one of all. Snow White lays dead in the forest, said the Queen. The huntsman has brought me proof. She opened the lid of a small box and held it up to the mirror. Look, her heart. But the mirror replied, Snow White still lives, the fairest in the land. 'Tis the heart of a pig you hold in your hand. I've been tricked, screamed the Queen, throwing the box to the floor. Enraged, the Queen ran down the steps leading to a secret room in the castle's deepest dungeon. There she prepared a magic potion to change her appearance so that Snow White would not recognise her. I'll trick her, just as I've been tricked, she said to the raven, who was watching above. The potion worked. In an instant, the Queen was transformed to an ugly old woman. Ha 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 ha, she cackled. Now, my little Snow White, I am going to prepare a special treat just for you. She took a plump red apple and plunged it into a cauldron filled with boiling poison. One bite of this apple and she'll be dead, hissed the wicked Queen. Then we'll see who's the most beautiful woman in the kingdom. It was dinner time at the dwarf's house. 7 hungry little men rushed towards the table. Wait a minute, said Snow White. First show me your hands. I knew there'd be trouble, mumbled Grumpy as the dwarfs looked at one another in surprise. Now, said Snow White softly, let me see your hands. One by one, the dwarfs held out their hands. Oh my goodness, this will never do. Look at those grubby hands and dirty fingernails, said Snow White. No one comes to the table with hands like those. Go and wash them, or you won't get anything to eat. She pointed to the water trough outside. All the dwarfs obediently went out and began to wash. All, that is, except Grumpy. Now look what she's done, he muttered. I'd like to see anyone make me wash if I didn't want to. He was so busy grumbling that he didn't notice the other dwarfs sneak up on him until it was too late. They dragged him to the trough and scrubbed him till he shone. After dinner, the dwarfs decided to have a party for their princess. They brought out the musical instruments and took turns dancing with Snow White. Dopey wanted to surprise Snow White. He wrapped himself in a long coat and climbed onto Sneeze's shoulders. Now he was as tall as the princess. Why, who is this dashing young man? Asked Snow White as she began dancing with him. It all went well until Sneezy let out an enormous tissue and Dopey and Sneezy collapsed in a heap. That night, while Snow White and the dwarfs slept peacefully in their beds, the wicked Queen left the castle by way of the moat that separated it from the forest. An evil gleam flashed in her eyes as she rode towards the forest edge. A basket of shiny red apples lay at her feet. The next morning, the dwarfs lined up for the inspection before setting off for work. Snow White made sure their hands and faces were clean, and she rewarded each dwarf with a kiss. Now remember, warned Doc, the Queen is full of witchcraft, so beware of strangers. Don't worry, said Snow White. I'll be all right. When the dwarfs had gone, Snow White began to prepare a special treat for them. I'm going to bake a pie, she told her animal friends, who had come to visit. Suddenly she heard footsteps approaching. Who can that be? Wondered Snow White. A ragged old woman appeared at the window. She offered Snow White some rosy red apples to put in the pie she was making. The birds twittered in alarm. They knew that the old woman was really the Queen in disguise. Fluttering and squawking, they dived at the Queen, knocking the apples from her hand. Snow White ran outside, waving her arms to chase the birds away. Shame on you for frightening a poor old woman, she scolded. The kind princess helped the old lady to her feet and took her inside for a drink of water. The animals gathered outside the window and looked on in horror as Snow White took one of the apples. They heard the wicked Queen say, It's a magic wishing apple. One bite and all your dreams will come true. Realising it was a trick, the animals raced off to find the dwarfs. The animals pulled and tugged at the dwarfs' clothing, desperately trying to warn them of the danger Snow White was in. Sneeze was the first one to realise what was wrong. Perhaps the Queen has got Snow White, he said. Snow White, gasped Grumpy. We've got to save her. Oh, so it looks like Grumpy's becoming a bit more of a friend ran towards Snow White. But it was too late. As soon as Snow White had bitten into the apple, she had fallen to the floor as if she were dead. The wicked queen cackled a gleam. "Only love's first kiss can save you now, my pretty little princess." Her evil laugh echoed through the little house. "Now I'll return to the castle," said the queen. "My magic mirror will tell me the truth. Now we'll see who's the fairest one of all." And she rushed out into the forest. The dwarfs sped towards their house, riding on the backs of deer. "There she is," cried Grumpy. "After her!" When she saw the dwarfs, the queen fled in the opposite direction. The dwarfs followed, waving sticks and pickaxes. The skies darkened, and rain began to fall. The queen climbed to the top of a cliff. "I'm trapped!" she cried. Then she had an idea. She picked up a stick and used it to try and loosen a huge boulder. Grumpy was the first to spot her. "Look out," he warned the others. "She's trying to crush us with that boulder." Thunder rumbled and rain pelted down from the sky. The enormous stone began to move. Then a loud crack of thunder sounded, and a tremendous bolt of lightning split the air. Startled by the noise, the queen lost her balance and fell backwards into the darkness. When the next flash of lightning lit up the sky, the boulder was still there, but the wicked queen had disappeared forever. When the weary dwarfs returned to the house, they found Snow White lying on the floor. They lifted her up and gently put her on her bed. Tears streamed down their faces as they knelt beside their beloved princess. The dwarfs could not bear to bury Snow White. They made a special coffin for her out of the clearest crystal, so that they could always see her lovely face. They put the coffin in the middle of the forest where all her animal friends could see her. Day after day the dwarfs visited her, each one wishing with all his heart that she would wake up. When spring arrived, flowers blossomed all around Snow White's tomb. One day, as the dwarfs knelt in the forest, they heard the sound of hoofbeats. They looked up and saw a handsome young man riding up on a white horse. It was Snow White's true love. The prince jumped off his horse and ran to the coffin. Slowly he lifted the crystal lid. "I've found you at last," whispered the prince, leaning towards Snow White. He gently kissed her pale lips. Suddenly Snow White's eyelids began to flutter. A smile spread slowly across her face. She opened her eyes. Snow White was alive. Shouts of joy rang out as the prince gathered Snow White into his arms and lifted her onto his horse. The dwarfs danced around and hugged one another with delight. Snow White looked down at her friends. "Goodbye," she called as the prince led her away to his castle high on the hill. And so Snow White's dearest wish came true, for she and her prince lived happily ever after. What a lovely story, AM. I really like that, and I love reading that to you so much. Anyway, next time you're down, I'll read it to you again. Mwah. Bye-bye.